I've been sewing for more years than I can remember, and one of my favorite things to make is a dress. And dresses are such a fashion statement right now. They're a great thing to sew. It's easy just to go to your closet and throw on a dress. And the patterns today have so many different options when you're making a dress. For example, these two dresses here, the red one and the brown one, are actually the same, made from the same pattern. And you can see that they both have the same princess seam lines, but they look like they're from two completely different dresses. And this one has a sleeve and a nice vintage collar on it. The other one is sleeveless. One has an A-line skirt, one has a dirndl skirt, and all those options come in the same pattern. So you can actually be your own designer. And one of the other things that's great with a dress like this is that it has a top and a bottom. And so if you're a different size on the bottom than you are on the top, you have that option of making two different sizes. The dress I'm wearing is actually the same pattern as this dress on our dress form. And I'm going to be giving you a few tips on different parts of this dress in a minute. But again, it's the same pattern. Mine has a collar and sleeves. This one has short sleeves and no collar. And this even gives you one further option. I can unbutton the cuff, and then I have a 3/4 sleeve dress. So there's so many different fashion things that you can do. So let's get started on the dress. After you cut, if you're going to sew with a knit, this dress is made out of a knit. If you're going to sew with knits and you want to use your serger, one thing you want to make sure is that you're actually sewing on your 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. So what I like to do is take a scrap of my fabric and I actually just mark a 5/8 of an inch line right on the fabric. When you're sewing with your serger, this particular serger has 2 needles in it. You want to make sure that it's the left-hand needle that is on that line, because if it's the right-hand needle, you're going to take maybe like 1/8 of an inch away from all your seams, and that could be the difference between a perfect fit and maybe making it a little bit too tight. So I'm just going to start to sew. Whoops, let me turn my machine on. That would help. I'm going to start to sew, and I'm just going to line it up so that my needle goes right on that line. And then I can see over here on the serger exactly where that 5/8 mark is. This serger does have a seam allowance or seam markings or seam guide, but what you might want to do is take a little piece of tape so makes it a little bit more visible for you to see. And then you'll be sure to have perfect 5/8 of an inch seam every time. This dress has on the neckline a binding. Now this binding is great because it gives it a nice flat finish. You don't have a facing in the neckline, so you can't see the facing on the inside of the dress. And it's just a great finish. And you can use it for this pattern, but once you know the technique, you can use it for many things. You can use it on a sleeveless dress, if you're making an armhole. You can use it as a binding finish on the bottom of a skirt. It's a really nice technique. Okay, and you're just going to take the binding piece, and this is actually a pattern piece that's with this pattern, and it gets folded in half, and then you stitch it with right sides together to the garment. Now, I've already stitched mine in place, and after you've stitched in place, you're going to press it over to the side, and then you're going to understitch. And what understitching is just stitching that is it'll be on the binding side of the fabric, but very close to the seam. And what that does is after you stitch it in, it makes the binding fold perfectly to the wrong side of your garment. So you want to sew really close. You can actually use the edge of your presser foot as a guide. And you want to sew as close to that seam as you can. Not going to go all the way down, so you get the idea. Now after I've done my understitching, look how nice this is. It just rolls right over and it stays perfectly in place. And then you go back, and now you're going to top stitch. And you get a nice bound edge. And it just is a nice finish, and it makes it lay nice and flat on your garment. Now, what you can also see on this dress is we have some tucks on the side. And sometimes people are a little intimidated by doing tucks, but they're actually really easy to do. The thing that you need to remember is you must mark your pattern piece before you unpin it. So as long as you put all the markings for your tucks or your pleats on the wrong side of your fabric, you're going to be fine. I have the first tuck already pinned, and you can see I have the 2 lines, and there's actually a little point here. That's this little point at the edge of the tuck. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to fold it right on that point, and then I'm going to fold it and make sure that those 2 lines are one right behind the other. Just put a couple of pins in there and line it up. And then you're just going to stitch them in place. You can use tailor's chalk or a water-soluble marker, whatever your preferred marking method is, to mark your pleats. Make sure when you're doing it that your other tucks are out of the way. And I just simply sew to the end, reverse, and then I'm going to sew the first one that I pinned just so you can see what it looks like when we have a couple of them stitched. Okay, and then when they're done, you're just going to press them all in the same direction, and see how it looks like they're sticking out, but when you press them down, they're all going in the same direction. Now I'd like to talk to you about sleeves. Don't be intimidated by sewing in a sleeve. There's just a few things that you need to remember. Sleeves have a definite front and a definite back. You can see I have 2 notches here and I have 1 notch here. The 2 notches are always in the back of the garment. So when you look at your garment itself, you will see that here's the front of my garment. I have 1 notch here. Here's the back. There's 2 notches there. So you want to make sure that you always put the correct sleeve in the correct armhole. If you don't, they are positioned a certain way. The sleeve isn't going to sit right, and it's going to feel a little odd actually when you have your garment on. The other thing that I like to do, there's a dot always at the very top of the sleeve. I usually take just a tiny little clip in that, and that clip is going to match up with the top of my, whoops, here I am telling you, and I'm putting the wrong sleeve in the wrong armhole. Here we go. Right sides together. That little clip I made in the top of the sleeve, I'm going to match up with the shoulder seam. Put a couple of pins in. Then I'm going to go down to the bottom part of my sleeve. And match up that seam allowance. Then I'm going to match the notches. Okay. Okay, and then you're just going to ease your sleeve in. Since this is a knit, it's very forgiving, so it's very, very easy to stretch the fabric and have the sleeve fit. Once you have your seam pinned in, you're all ready to sew. And I just want to give you one more tip. If you have a sewing machine like this that has a free arm, now's the perfect time to use it. You're going to simply remove the bed so that it exposes the free arm, and then your sleeve will just go easily over that, and you can sew all the way around, and it's a breeze to sew in your sleeve. So, and I hope these tips have helped you, and remember, when you're looking at a dress, look at all the views. Don't think that just because the one in the center is not quite your cup of tea, that you don't want the pattern. Look at all the different views, you be the designer, and just have fun with it.